Hi guys, how are you today? Welcome back to my channel, Adventures in America. Today we're going to talk about the most frequently asked questions when traveling in the Philippines. I actually made a first video and I want you to check it out. And we are going to cover a lot of topics today, and I hope that you stay tuned up to the end of the video. So let's talk about who can travel to the Philippines during this pandemic. Number one, dual citizen of the Philippines and a foreign country. If a dual citizen by reason of birth, per Bureau of Immigration regulations, you will need either a Philippine passport or a travel document. If a dual citizen by reason of naturalization or RA number 9225, check with your airlines if it will accept your dual citizenship documents. Example, oath of allegiance, order of approval, or identification certificate, and your valid foreign passport. Before traveling to the Philippines, it is recommended that you need to pre-book an accredited quarantine facility and a COVID-19 testing provider. Number two, foreign government or international organization officers, staff, and their dependents. This is a government-to-government transaction, so this will require approval from the Department of Foreign Affairs. Number three, foreign spouse, parent traveling with or joining the Filipino spouse or child to or in the Philippines. As modified by Interagency Task Force on the Emerging Infectious Diseases Resolution number 60, the following can enter the Philippines if they secure the appropriate visa: foreign spouse of Filipino national, foreign minor children or foreign children with special needs regardless of age of Filipino national, and the foreign parent of minor Filipino children and of Filipino children with special needs regardless of age. Number four, foreign airline crew seafarers. Number five, Section 13 visa holders. These are holders of quota visas 13 and immigrant visas issued by reason of marriage to a Filipino. It's 13A, to a returning former Filipino, it's a 13G, and to a child born to an immigrant visa holder and to a returning alien resident. EO324 visa holder. These are aliens holding permanent resident status under Executive Order number 324 or the Alien Legalization Program of 1988. Also, they need an accredited quarantine facility and a COVID-19 testing provider. RA7919 visa holder. So these are aliens holding permanent resident status in the Philippines. Also, they need an accredited quarantine facility and a COVID-19 testing center. Native-born visa holders. So these are children born in the Philippines who are visa holders because their parent or parents is or are lawful permanent resident aliens. Also, they need to pre-book an accredited quarantine facility and a COVID-19 testing provider. Indian nationals with temporary resident visas, and Chinese nationals with permanent resident visas by reason of marriage to a Filipino. So those are the persons who can travel to the Philippines during the pandemic. If you watch my earlier video, I stated the visa requirements for former Filipino citizens and foreign spouse of Filipino national, including the foreign minor children and foreign parents of the Filipino national. They needed to apply for a non-immigrant visa to travel in the Philippines. However, there are instances of visa denials, and I'm gonna explain to you why there are reasons for visa denials. Please take note that the Philippine immigration authorities will not allow entry into Philippine airports and seaports the following foreign nationals: those holding non-machine readable passports or hand-scripted passports, or those previously deported from the Philippines or included in the blacklist order of the Department of Foreign Affairs or Bureau of Immigration, or those with incomplete documentation, or those with circumstances that would render them inadmissible for entry even with a valid passport and a visa issued by a Philippine consulate. One example would be the submission of fake or scanned copies of marriage certificates by a foreign national. If you are married to a Filipino, if you are submitting fake documents, then you will be denied entry. Please take note that all arriving international passengers to the Philippines need to undergo a quarantine and mandatory COVID testing. So I'm going to send all the resources and links for the facilities accredited by the Department of Health and this testing provider, so you know ahead of time where you wanted to book or set up an appointment before arriving in the Philippines. If you go over the quarantine hotels accredited by the Department of Health, there are hotels that are classified for stringent quarantine, and there is another one for mandatory quarantine. So what is the difference between these two? In any facility for stringent or mandatory quarantine, you'll need to follow health protocols in place. If you're headed to a mandatory quarantine facility and were tested with a rapid antibody test, you'll stay in isolation for 14 days, after which you can expect to be tested again. So in mandatory quarantine, you will be quarantined for 14 days. So there's no 14-day quarantine for the stringent classification. So what happens when you arrive in the Philippines? Travelers arriving in the Philippines will have to go through several steps in order to evaluate their health situation. A thermal scan and collection of health declaration card will be carried out by the Bureau of Quarantine. A case investigation form will be provided upon your departure from certain countries. Arriving passengers will be split into two groups, stringent and mandatory quarantine. Stringent quarantine passengers showing symptoms of the disease. Country of origin or layover is one has a high level of community transmission based on the World Health Organization's latest situation report. Mandatory quarantine, this is for passengers with no symptoms. Country of origin or layover has not been classified as a high level of community transmission area. Stringent versus mandatory quarantine. According to the health guidelines, individuals who will be placed under stringent quarantine will be under the supervision of the Bureau of Quarantine in their designated quarantine facility that caters to the criteria under stringent quarantine, and the real-time polymerase chain reaction test will also be administered to everyone placed in this quarantine measure. Meanwhile, in mandatory quarantine, the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration or the Philippine Coast Guard will facilitate the quarantine measure. Let's go over the testing procedure. Orientation on the specific quarantine protocols will be carried out by a quarantine medical officer. Filling out of pertinent documents through a one-stop shop. And then the government officials will then arrange your screening process with other airport agencies such as the Bureau of Immigration and Transportation. And you'll get tested for the coronavirus disease. After the testing process, you will be transported directly to a designated stringent or mandatory quarantine facility. For overseas Filipino workers, their manning agency and OWA will shoulder the expenses for their accommodations. For non-overseas Filipino workers and foreigners, they will have to shoulder the cost of their accommodations, and they can choose a government-approved quarantine facility. So the cost will vary per quarantine facility. The following health protocols will be applicable. Once settled in the quarantine facility, constant monitoring of the health condition will be implemented. You will stay in quarantine until your test results are received. For individuals who are under mandatory quarantine and are tested with a rapid antibody test, the isolation is 14 days, followed by another test. If symptoms of coronavirus develop during the quarantine period, a nasal swab will be administered for a PCR test. So how are you going to get the results of your test? If you have a positive test, you'll be transferred to a referral hospital or temporary treatment and monitoring facility where you receive clinical care as a coronavirus patient. The Department of Health Emergency Management will decide whether you'll be referred to a hospital or treatment center based on further health protocols. A medical certificate will be issued once you are clear for discharge, and before being allowed to head back home, you will be brought to your local government unit. As part of the health protocol, your local government unit will still advise a 14-day home quarantine. So if you receive a negative test, what will happen? You'll be allowed to leave your quarantine accommodations, and once cleared for discharge, you'll be issued a medical certificate. Before being allowed to head back home, you will be brought to your local government unit. As part of the health protocol, your local government unit will still advise a 14-day home quarantine. Let's talk about the general community quarantine. So most areas in the Philippines are now placed under GCQ or General Community Quarantines. What effect would this have on local or international travelers? Please take note that travel for leisure purposes is still not allowed in areas under General Community Quarantine. Guidelines also impose travel restrictions depending on age and health conditions. So those who are below 21 years old or 60 years old and above will not be allowed to travel in areas under General Community Quarantine. Pregnant women, among others, will also not be allowed to travel. For domestic travelers, a travel authority or pass is being required by the Department of Interior and local government to travel across provinces or regions across the country under the General Community Quarantine. Guests may apply for a travel pass or authority at the nearest police station. A medical certificate from the municipal or city health office is needed to apply for the said pass, and a barangay certification is necessary as an endorsement to the municipal or city health office to conduct a medical examination. So said travel pass will not be required for travel related to work or business. Things are really getting complicated when you travel in the Philippines. When you move from one local government unit to another or from another region or province, you need to secure several travel pass or local pass or medical certificates. So my advice is that if your travel is not essential at all, do not travel and save yourself the expense, the money, and the headache from all of these travel restrictions and guidelines. I hope that I provided you information regarding travel updates in the Philippines. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. And as always, I will continue to provide you more information. And if you have any questions or comments, just post your questions down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and I'll try my best to answer them for you. Again, thank you so much guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks, bye-bye.